I think I found a potential legal nuclear weapon to blow a hole through federal gun control laws, something that I'm unaware of anybody else has ever pointed out. And I did this in the context of you guys asking me what can be done about the NFA. Well, I don't have a specific answer on the NFA just yet. I'm working on that. I did find something very interesting with the Gun Control Act of 1968 and how perhaps there's ways to distribute firearms legally without having to officially comply with the Gun Control Act of 1968. Let me explain when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, best-selling author, constitutional attorney, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and proud American gun owner. If you have not subscribed to the Four Boxes Diner Second Amendment channel, please do so and show your love for the right to keep and bear arms. We all understand that in order to engage in the business of the gun industry, making firearms for money or for profit or attempted profit, selling guns for profit, and the like. If you're in the business of guns, meaning you're selling guns or making guns for money, you have to license yourself and get what's known as an FFL, which is a federal firearms license. We all understand this. If you're in the business of selling or making firearms, you have to get that license. Why? Because under the Gun Control Act of 1968, which is a federal law, says you have to do it. And some of the other things that FFLs have to do once you get that license is you have to comply with various laws in terms of how you transfer the guns and how you serialize the guns and how you mark the guns and designate where they came from. So we have on the one extreme, if you're in the business of making or selling guns, you have to comply with the Gun Control Act and get a license called an FFL. And there's different types of licenses that cost different amounts of money. We all know this from basically how the gun industry works. Then there's on the other extreme, if you want to make a gun for yourself in your basement, under federal law at least, you're allowed to go ahead and do so. There's certain guns you're not allowed to make, like machine guns, but in terms of ordinary firearms, you're allowed to make that. In fact, you have a Second Amendment right to do so, according to most historians and scholars, to make your own firearm in your basement, provided, of course, that you're not doing it to sell for a profit, because once you start making guns to sell for a profit, you become a manufacturer of guns that have to get a license. And if you sell guns for the purposes of making a profit, et cetera, and you're in the business of firearms, I mean, you're continuously doing it, and you don't have a license, well, you're committing a crime and you don't want to do that. So on the one extreme, you have people that have to get a license because they're selling guns for profit. And then on the other extreme, you have people that are allowed to make guns for themselves in their basement as a general matter under the Second Amendment, under their American rights, being able to make your own firearm. Now, here is what I've actually think I figured out. Now, again, don't take this as official legal advice. If anyone were actually going to try to do what I'm about to suggest, you'd want to run it by your accountant and run it by your gun-related lawyers and do all that good stuff and, discuss how to do this. But I think I'm actually generally right on what I'm about to say. It seems to me that the anti-gun community, of course, is cracking down on two things. They're trying to crack down on people that can make their own firearms, which they label it as a propaganda term, ghost guns. They're trying to make it hard to be able to make your own gun. They want to make that illegal. Why? For a variety of reasons, one of which is they want to force you to serialize the gun, identify the gun, any gun being made, so they can put it on some sort of registry and be able to track the guns. And they don't want you making guns in your basement that don't have to be, registered, that don't have to have ID on it, don't have to have a serial number, et cetera, because they find it harder to track, which of course it is, as a practical matter. And then on the other hand, of course, the anti-gun lobby is trying to crack down on the gun industry. I think there's many reasons for this. I think one of the big reasons is because the anti-gun lobby has been crushed in the courts as to the scope and the meaning of the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms. They're shifting a lot of the money from trying to attack Second Amendment rights directly, because that's been badly blown. That effort's been badly blown up by virtue of the fact that they've lost cases like Nysurper versus Bruin in the Supreme Court, that I think they're reallocating their resources to take on the gun industry because they have that extra money. And they say, look, we're having problems with the Second Amendment space, so let's focus on going after the gun industry. So why is that? Because, of course, if there's no guns in America, no gun sales, no gun manufacturers, then you can't buy guns and can't benefit and exercise your Second Amendment rights with new firearms. That's a no-brainer. So what have I now figured out with that context? So here is my idea that I think I figured out, and I may publish an article, and I look forward to your comments on to see if you agree with what I figured out, and that is this. It seems to me, as I read the Gun Control Act, if you're not trying to make money by making guns and selling them, if you're not doing it for profit, or you're not in the business of continuously doing it to make money, earn a livelihood, or whatnot, then you don't have to get a license to make guns. So why does any of this matter? Well, we know that the gun industry and people making guns are under attack. So is there a way to go on the offense and make it extra hard for the anti-gun movement to track guns and to get these guns serialized? And I think the answer may be yes. And here's how I'm thinking about it. There's a type of entity in the United States called nonprofits. We know these. They're often referred to as 501c3s. These are not-for-profits or they're nonprofits. Often they're religious-oriented, they're cultural-oriented, like museums, churches. They could be educational things. They could be for social welfare. For example, they take in money to donate. You donate money, like Salvation Army, and then they use that money to help out the poor or kids that are in need, to provide school books or what have you. The point is, these are, and some, of course, there's educational donations, meaning, you can give money to your university that you graduated from or to your school that you went to, et cetera, et cetera. So the point is, there are educational and religious and charitable components and cultural components like museums that go into this. So here's what I'm thinking. It seems to me that the gun rights movement could set up one or more nonprofits, and I would probably recommend doing this in a red state like maybe Oklahoma, maybe Texas, maybe Florida, whatnot, and set up one or more nonprofits with the purpose of being manufacturing firearms, not for profit, not to go into the business of selling guns, but for the purposes of charitably giving them away to, of course, eligible people that have been properly trained, properly vetted, and who have passed appropriate background checks. What I mean by this is, it seems to me that nothing would prevent, that I can tell under the federal statutory law of the Gun Control Act of 1968, from a charitable organization taking in donations, manufacturing firearms without all the serial numbers and all that, it would seem to me, because again, if the Gun Control Act doesn't apply to you because you don't have a license, you don't have to comply with all those various requirements, and they can manufacture these firearms, and then they could transfer these firearms, again, through the 4473 process and the like, to individuals that are not prohibited persons. And again, it seems to me that they would not have to get any of the other licenses because they're not in the business. They're not trying to make profit. They're doing this as a charity. So that might be a very interesting idea to pursue in certain red states. There would be nothing that I can tell that would prevent an organization from setting up a 501c3, or it could be an existing 501c3 that wants to expand its mission. And we know that gun-related organizations can be 501c3s. I know, for example, just off the top of my head, the NRA Civil Rights Defense Fund is a 501c3, and I think there's countless other gun-related 501c3s out there. I'm sure there's gun training programs and whatnot that are 501c3s. You probably know more about them than I do, but they're certainly out there. And what's interesting is the people that are actually learning to make firearms could actually be part of the educational mission. So, for example, you could bring in apprentices, and they could actually manufacture the firearms for the nonprofit, the 501c3, and they would be trained in tooling and all CNS machines and all the different things that go into making firearms, which, of course, could allow them to get jobs elsewhere, or perhaps it would allow them to go into other industries after they've learned the tools of the trade, like any other apprenticeship program where people, especially many that don't want to go to college, they actually pick up a skill in a trade. So you actually would have a 501c3 here that would be providing people the ability to manufacture firearms, and the people that were actually doing it would be picking up skills that they would really need and benefit going forward in their lives. So you would have an educational component in terms of the making the firearms. Now, in terms of, again, you're not selling the firearms, but in terms of giving away the firearms, you're donating the firearms. This is a gift, right? You're not selling guns to make money. You'd be distributing the firearms to whoever you would think was appropriate. So, you could give it to people that couldn't afford firearms. I mean, there's plenty of organizations that give away computers to individuals that can't afford them, or they give away internet access. Maybe they donate or give away cell phones to people that can't afford it. There's all sorts of nonprofits in America that give away these kinds of resources. Some even give away homes, right? So that people can live a better life. And I don't see any reason why, nonprofits could not give away or gift firearms to those that could not afford it. In fact, there's a Supreme Court case, and I wrote down the name, called Abramsky versus the United States, that's from 2014. And in Abramsky versus the United States in 2014, if you look at the Justice Scalia dissent in that case involved whether or not there's a straw purchase, which we don't need to get into the details here, but it was a discussion of firearms law involving 4473s and representations and whatnot. And if you look at the Scalia dissent in that case, he talks about all the different things that the ATF and federal government considers not to be a straw purchase, not to be improper, meaning you can take possession of the gun and then eventually transfer it and not violate law, according to this dissent by Justice Scalia, pretty smart guy. And one of the examples he gave off was, people are able to buy firearms for the purposes of raffling them off. So even though you're buying a gun with the intent to raffle them off to some other person, you're allowed to do that under federal law, according to Justice Scalia's dissent in the Abramsky case in 2014. So there you have it. That's one possibility. Now, the other interesting thought I had was, what would prevent a state like the state of Florida under Ron DeSantis, or perhaps the state of Texas under Greg Abbott, from also creating a state-based firearms company? Again, they would not be, as long as they're not selling guns or engaged in the commerce of gun, if they're set up specifically for training people to how to manufacture firearms, and then the purpose being giving them away, gifting them away, donating them away, because remember, you're not in the business of firearms as best I can tell. It seems to me that you could do this in a couple of different ways. You could have nonprofits potentially do this. You could also have a state, like the state of Florida could potentially do this and set up gun companies that don't have to comply with all aspects of the Gun Control Act. Now, of course, there are aspects of the Gun Control Act that everyone has to comply with, even if you're not licensed. But that's not the purpose of this video. I'm not trying to break it down every single possible detail, but I understand there are parts of the Gun Control Act that apply to everyone, including people that are not licensed and don't have to make guns and are not in the business of making guns. So it seems to me that while the anti-gunners are trying to go on the attack by going after so-called ghost guns and do-it-yourself guns, homemade guns on the one hand, and they're going after the gun industry on the other hand, and they're trying to get serialization everywhere, including through this credit card scheme where they're trying to have credit card companies crack down on gun sales. I'm not sure that's going to work, but that's a subject of a different video. I think we should consider, as a Second Amendment movement, considering playing some offense, being aggressive for a change, having 501c set up in proper jurisdictions. I would not set this up in New York or California because you're just going to get harassed by the AGs there. But, set this up in relevant red states, set up gun companies that literally are run by non-for-profits, not for making money, because again, they're not making money. And you might ask, how might a 501c3, get set up? And the answer is, of course, they get set up like anything else. You set them up and they take in donations. And it's quite possible that a lot of Americans that donate to gun-related issues and also educational issues and apprenticeship and vocational issues might be willing to donate. I don't know. Maybe there's some very wealthy people out there that would want to set something like this up. And again, I would do this in the favorable jurisdictions out there. But with that said, it seems to me it's an interesting idea. And of course, the benefit to this is you literally would have gun companies that are not in the business of selling guns for profit, but you'd have gun charities teaching people how to manufacture guns, which is an education mission, and also giving these guns away to people that can't afford them, which is a charitable mission. And of course, I would argue there's a very strong argument that these gun companies, whether these gun nonprofits, I don't think we should call them gun companies, they're really gun nonprofits, right? Gun manufacturing nonprofit entities. These are entities that would be run either by nonprofits or potentially even by a state. Now, I suppose there would be pushback by the gun industry because for every gun given away through these charities would be, I suppose, a gun that cannot be sold or would not need to be sold by gun companies. But again, you have to think about the big picture here, which is that if the anti-gun movement is trying to attack gun ownership and the Second Amendment across the board in the United States in various ways, you don't want to just play defense. Sometimes the best defense is a strong offense, and finding other ways to expand gun ownership and gun availability in the United States would be a way of playing offense. And I would say it's a curveball that the anti-gunners haven't thought of, because I don't think anybody else has thought of this idea that I'm aware of other than me, dealing with this notion of getting around the Gun Control Act using nonprofits and or state actors. Okay, again, this is just food for thought. I'm not saying go out there and do this under the law, but it's an interesting idea. I wanted to share it with you. A brainstorm I had, I connected some dots. I looked at this. It seems like what I'm saying makes some sense and seems to be within the law. No one's ever tried this. I don't know if it would work in the real world. But again, I'm looking forward to your comments and thoughts because, again, I may be taking this concept, writing some sort of an article on it and trying to expand on the idea if I think it might fly. Okay, well, I hope you learned something here today at the Four Boxes Diner. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and we'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.